when I met Louis Leakey, I could answer lots of his questions, and that's why he gave me a job. So she, you know, she was this great support. And when the authorities in what was then Tanganyika, British Protectorate, told Louis they absolutely refused to allow a young English girl out into the bush alone, that it was preposterous and ridiculous, then eventually they said, oh, but she must have a companion. And my mother volunteered. You know, it wasn't that I had to bring my mother, not like Liberace, but it was, she volunteered. She said, yes, I'll go with her. She came for the first 4 months and set up a little clinic for the local people, so that simple aspirins and Band-Aids, you know, she wasn't a doctor. And she cured many of them. So she became known as a white witch doctor. So there was this great relationship with all the local people that stood me in such good stead.
You lived in the wilderness. You probably didn't see it as wilderness when that's your home, but you had to deal with tsetse flies and hardship. And I can't help but wonder if you dreamt of a soft bed, if you dreamt of taking a walk to a movie theater and going out for a little dinner and a glass of wine while you were there. Did you ever have moments where you just wanted more of an ordinary life?
No, there were moments after a long hot day, and I wished I had a drink of water, but which I needed. But no, I did not once did I want to change the forest for something else. And fortunately, you know, I've never cared about food. And I think Louis Leakey realized very quickly. He took me onto the Serengeti. He gave me the opportunity to help look for fossils. So I had that side of it too. And he realized, yeah, A, I really wanted to learn about animals. B, I really was okay in the wilderness. I didn't miss clothes or hairdressers or parties or boyfriends or any of those things. And that's why he gave me this extraordinary opportunity. At a time when, you know, as we've said, I had no degree, nothing. He saw something. He'd been looking for someone for 10 years.
You also discovered that evil is not necessarily just a human trait.
Up Close, brought to you by Lexus.
When I watched some of the early films years ago, I remember thinking one time that you are in effect a time traveler, that you are this ambassador from our point in the evolutionary development of our species, who went back to an earlier point and learned perhaps as much about us as you did about the chimps.
I think that's true, and you know, this was Louis Leakey's dream. He was a giant of a man, and he really was so far-sighted. And he had this conviction. There he was, digging up the fossilized remains of our earlier Stone Age ancestors. But how did they live? Behavior doesn't fossilize. And he just had this feeling that if we could find out about our closest relatives today in the wild state, that this would help him have a better feeling for how our own ancestors may have lived. And you know, the argument is, if we find behavior that's in humans today and chimpanzees today, then it was probably present in a common ancestor, if we believe in evolution, which I do. And therefore in our earliest ancestors, truly human as well, kissing, embracing, holding hands, patting on the back, strong family bonds, warlike behavior, compassion, love, altruism, all these things we can imagine bringing to life the fossils that Louis Leakey and others uncover.
You also discovered that evil is not necessarily just a human trait.
Well, I think certainly brutality. Chimpanzees capable of brutality. They're very aggressively territorial. They will raid a neighboring community's homeland, as it were. They will attack individuals and leave them to die of their wounds. But I don't think that they, intelligent as they are, with brains so like ours, I don't think they're capable of deliberate torture. And that's, to me, evil. So they can be brutal and they can be aggressive, but it's kind of the moment. Whereas we're capable of this very sinister sort of evil, this planned evil, and sometimes with us it's psychological evil.
The warfare that you witnessed, that was, when you see the footage of it, it is incredibly violent, as all war is, though. For our species, war is typically a result of one group wanting something that another group has. That's almost always the basis, and then there are all kinds of other reasons that are put on it to justify this brutality.
Yes.
Do you think it was the same thing among the chimps?
Because what happened with what I call the 4-year war, if you imagine one large area of ground that is shared by 14 males, and then maybe because there's too many males, it's hard for a dominance hierarchy to work with more than about 10 males. And this was 14 adults and some adolescents. So the community divided. Some of the males moved south with some of the females, but that was still within the same original area. So now the larger group of males, they suddenly couldn't go to places they remembered down in the south. It was occupied by a group that had separated itself off and where interactions had become aggressive. Well, they wanted back. They wanted to go and find the food that they remembered there. So it could well be a competition for resources, which again sounds very human.
So at least as far as primates are concerned, since they are our relatives, how does that extrapolate out to where we are now? We've evolved in so many ways, except perhaps that.
Well, I think if we're looking for correlations of the kind of violence we see in the chimps, you know, that relates to things like gang warfare. But when we come to international war, the kind of thing we're up against in the world today, I think that's very far removed from the chimpanzees, although possibly it comes back to competition for resources, which we talked about before. And the tragedy of what's happening in the world today is that with our growing numbers and our improved technology, we're better able to destroy the environment, we're better able to colonize more and more of the natural resources, and we're damaging the planet, we're poisoning it, we're having water shortages of horrifying proportion around the world, the global climates are changing, there are millions of environmental refugees, and it's leading to an atmosphere of tension where violence can erupt so easily. When you're watching animals, if you're completely alone, it's possible to be in their world.
An objective scientist observing humans as well as the 4-year war in Gombe, would they not be likely to postulate that this was part of the natural selection process? That the stronger of the species, no matter what the tools they use, a rock or a missile, that the stronger species wins, and that that's part of nature?
Yes, in fact, when I first started talking about the inter-community attacks, I was criticized by some scientists who said you shouldn't publish this because that will give people the idea that aggression is innate, inherited from our ancient primate past, and that therefore violence and war is inevitable and we shouldn't bother. But you know, first of all, I don't agree. We have this incredible brain, we have a sophisticated language, we can think about our behavior. I think we have more power to control our biological nature than any other creature. And we also have to realize that love and compassion and altruism is equally deeply buried in our primate past. We've inherited these characteristics as well. And so it's up to us, I guess, for each one of us to balance the, you know, the dark side with the opposite.
Do you feel like you've missed out on this part of the human experience in order to observe the chimpanzee experience? Is there something, looking back now at the 43 years that you've done this, that you kind of feel like maybe I should have spent some more time among my own kind?
No, I mean, I married, I had a child.